Years later, I remembered her words before she left. At the time, they seemed like a disjointed outburst of resentment, torn from the throat of a person who was too tired to fight. Now, now I understand that it was a final warning left for me, like a knot in my memory that I untied too late. She stood in the doorway, illuminated by the dim light from the kitchen window. It was raining outside, and the occasional flash of headlights occasionally pulled her face out of the darkness, making it seem like a stranger's, pale, confused, but somehow doomed and calm. I remember her eyes. At the time, I didn't understand what I saw in them, but now I'm sure it was the look of someone who understands that they have already taken a step into my life and will never return. You, you never try to understand, she said quietly, almost in a whisper. You listen to the words, but you don't hear me. It's always been that way. I wanted to say something in response, to explain, to justify myself. But the words, as luck would have it, stuck in my throat, and I just stood there, trying to understand what was happening. She looked at me as if she was saying goodbye not only to me, but to everything that once connected us, the past hopes, mistakes, those rains we stood under together and laughed, confident that only light awaited us ahead. You'll understand later, she said, only later, when you can't change anything anymore. And she left. I didn't even go after her. It seemed to me that this was just another quarrel, of which we had had too many to count. I thought she would come back, talk it out, calm down, and tomorrow we would have breakfast together and discuss who would buy the bread. But she didn't come back tomorrow, or a week later, or a month later. And I, stubbornly convinced that I was right, didn't go looking for her. Stupid principle, which in youth you mistake for strength. Now, years later, I regret not taking a step then. But that was only the beginning. Because later, when I finally decided to figure out what we had lost, it turned out that her departure was not the most important secret of that story. At that time, I was 27. I lived in my first apartment, which still smelled of cheap renovations, and which I had acquired almost by accident from my uncle through some murky inheritance scheme that I didn't really understand at the time. I worked in a small private printing house, where the eternal smell of ink ate into my clothes so deeply that it felt like I had become part of a huge printing press. I didn't particularly like the job, but it allowed me to live. In the evenings, I would come home tired, sometimes satisfied, but more often than not, just empty, and only her voice filled the space around me with some kind of warmth. Lila and I met by chance, as usually happens in stories that later seem fateful. I was standing in line for coffee. She was behind me, and the barista, having mixed up the orders, handed Lila my cup. She laughed, a light, sincere laugh, the kind that makes even the most sullen people turn around. I apologized, she said. It's okay. It happens, and without meaning to, started a conversation. That's how it all started. Coffee, quick meetings, walks, conversations until nightfall. Lilia wasn't the kind of person who spoke directly. She always paused, as if to check whether you understood the meaning hidden between the lines. Sometimes it was annoying, but more often than not, it was attractive. There was something subtle, poignant, almost painfully honest about her behavior. She never talked about her fears, but I could see them in her every move. And perhaps that's what attracted me, the feeling that she was holding something important inside, something I couldn't quite reach. A year later, we moved in together. I was sure I knew her well enough, that I understood what she wanted from life, what she was striving for, what worried her. But in reality, I knew almost nothing about her. That was the root of everything that happened next. At first, the changes were subtle. Lila became a little quieter, a little more pensive, and began to stand at the window more often, as if waiting for someone or something. Sometimes she would go out late at night, just to get some fresh air, she said. I asked if everything was okay, and she smiled. Yes, I'm just tired. I believed her. We both pretended that everything was fine. But one night, I woke up and realized she wasn't there. At first, I thought she had gone to the kitchen for water again, but the kitchen was empty. So was the hallway. I looked at my watch. It was 3:42 a.m. It was strange. Thoughts instantly began to race through my mind. What if she's sick? What if something happened? I threw on my jacket and went outside. Our yard was bathed in the dark, bluish light of the streetlights. Cars were rumbling in the distance, and the wind was blowing trash along the empty paths. And there, by the far entrance, I saw her. Lila was standing in the shadows, talking to someone. A tall figure, the silhouettes barely discernible, but I could see her pressing her palms to her face as if holding back tears. Then, a slight movement. He touched her shoulder, and she didn't pull away. I took a step forward, but froze. I don't know what stopped me. Fear? Jealousy? The feeling that I was watching not reality, but a scene from someone else's life? And then, in that moment of indecision, the figure opposite her said something quietly. Lila nodded and walked away into the night in the opposite direction from the house. The man watched her go, then slowly disappeared into the depths of the courtyard. I didn't follow her. I don't know why. I went home, lay down in bed, but spent the rest of the night just lying there with my eyes open, listening to the rumbling in my chest. In the morning, she returned as if nothing had happened. I wanted to ask her where she had been, but I was afraid to hear the answer. She looked at me a little longer than usual and understood everything without words. It was the first time I felt a distance between us. Real, cold, not the kind that comes from petty quarrels, but the kind that appears when one person is already living a different life, even if they don't admit it out loud. The relationship began to crumble almost imperceptibly. It was as if small cracks were slowly creeping across the glass until at one point it was bound to shatter into pieces. We still lived together, but each of us seemed to be living separately. She became silent. I became irritable. She closed herself off. I tried to shout her down. We both understood that it wasn't about everyday life, fatigue, or external circumstances. There was something else, something deeper than we were willing to admit. Then that day came. The day she left. I won't describe the argument itself. It was strangely quiet, slow. We hardly shouted, we just spoke different languages. At some point, Lila stopped looking me in the eye and said, "You still don't understand." "Understand what?" I asked. She shook her head, as if giving up. "It doesn't matter anymore." And she left. As I said, I didn't go after her. That was probably my biggest mistake. Although, to be honest, I didn't understand at the time that it was much deeper than just our relationship. And that's where everything I only learned years later began. The thing that turned my life upside down and made me look at the past differently. It had to do with my uncle, the apartment we lived in, and the man she was meeting that night. But I didn't find out about it right away. First, there were years of emptiness. Years in which I tried to live as before. But it was as if I were walking through the ruins of my own decisions. I returned to the same apartment, worked at the same printing house, ate the same food, drank the same coffee, but everything seemed wrong, as if I had stolen someone else's props from the past. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for Lila to reappear in the doorway, quietly saying, "Well, did you miss me?" And we would both laugh at our own drama. But that didn't happen. I tried to start new relationships, unsuccessfully. Not because I was comparing them, no. It was just that something remained unfinished inside me. Something sharp that prevented me from moving on. And then, almost 5 years later, I received a letter. And that's when the real story began to unfold. The letter was short. No lofty phrases. "You should talk to me. I'm leaving for a week, but if you want to know the truth, find me." The address is on the back. There was no signature, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Lilia, 5 years, and for the first time in all that time, she wanted to see me. I sat with that letter for a long time, turning it over in my hands, reading it over and over. Everything was boiling inside me. I was afraid. Afraid of what she would say, afraid of the truth, afraid of seeing her, changed, a stranger. But even more, I was afraid not to go. And so I went. The address led me to a small house on the outskirts of town. It was an old 2-story brick house with an overgrown but well-kept yard. It seemed as if time passed more slowly and quietly here. I climbed the creaky steps and knocked. She opened the door. Lilia looked different, older, weaker, as if the years had weighed more heavily on her than on me. But her eyes were the same. Deep, alert, full of secrets. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello." We were silent for a long time. Then she gestured for me to come inside. What happened next was the first turning point that changed everything for me. A turning point that made me realize that her departure was only a superficial consequence of a much deeper, darker story. A story that stretched back into the shadows of my past, long before we met. And it began with my uncle. Lilia was silent for a long time, running her fingers along the rim of a porcelain cup with cold tea. It seemed she was still deciding whether to tell me or not, whether it was worth revealing what she had kept inside for so many years. I waited without interrupting. The house smelled of dust and old wood. The air was still, as if nothing had changed here for a long time. Only her breathing, quiet and uneven, seemed alive, the only movement in this frozen space. I didn't know how to start, she finally said. All this time I was thinking about what to say to you, and whether it was worth saying at all. Then why did you call me? I asked cautiously. She flinched, not at my words, but rather at her own answer. Because there's almost no time left. Because it'll come out anyway, and you have a right to know. She looked at me directly. There was no reproach, no resentment, not even warmth in that look, only a firm, heavy decision. This isn't about us, she said. It's not even about why I left. It's about something that happened long before. Before me. Before you. Before everything. I didn't understand where she was going with this. But her voice was too serious to interrupt. You were never really interested in your uncle, were you? She asked. I shrugged. He was strange. Closed off. I saw him a couple of times as a child, and that was it. Mom hardly ever talked about him. Yes, Lila said briefly. Because she wanted you to live a normal life. And so that his choices wouldn't become yours. I froze. What choices? She took a deep breath, like someone about to dive into icy water. Your uncle wasn't just in the printing business. More precisely, the printing business was a cover. He printed documents. Fake ones. And not for petty crooks. For people who couldn't be seen, who disappeared, changed their names, left their past behind. And he did it for years. I recoiled as if from a sharp blow. What? But why do I need all this now? My uncle is dead. The schemes have long been closed. This has nothing to do with you or me. She shook her head. It does. Very much so. I felt anxiety rising in my chest. Explain. She looked at the window, where the dim light of the street was reflected. Do you wonder why I was standing in the courtyard with that man at night? She asked, without looking at me. My heart skipped a beat. I remembered that scene. I remembered it too well. I don't know, I said honestly, because he was one of those people, one of those whom your uncle once helped disappear. And he found me, not you me, because I was closer, because I was already living with you and knew where you kept your documents. Papers, old things, what was left after your uncle. Wait, I raised my hand. Slow down. Are you saying that man came to you? Yes. And he was looking for documents? She closed her eyes. He was looking for what your uncle had hidden, and he thought you had inherited it along with the apartment. I choked on my breath. But I didn't find anything. Because you weren't looking for the right thing. Because you didn't know what you were looking for. She squeezed the cup so hard that her fingers turned white. But they knew. They watched from afar all these years, hoping that sooner or later you would discover what was hidden in that apartment. And when they saw that you weren't living alone, they decided to approach me. My head was spinning. It felt like reality was starting to fall apart at the seams, as if someone had suddenly pulled the rug out from under my feet. Lilia, I exhaled. Why didn't you tell me? She smiled bitterly, wearily, because you would have ruined everything. You would have tried to figure out, and they are dangerous people. Not gangsters from cheap movies, no. They are quiet, invisible, the kind who have no past, and no mercy. A chill ran down my spine. What do they want? What documents? She sighed. Not documents. A sheet. A single sheet of paper. With numbers. Coordinates. A code. I didn't quite understand it. But they were sure your uncle had hidden it in the apartment. I don't know the true value of that sheet. But, judging by how they searched for it, it's something very important. But I didn't find anything. I found it. Silence hung in the room, as if the air had become thick. When? I managed to ask. The very day I left. I stood up. Lilia, did you find what they were looking for? What that man came for. She nodded. Yes. And did you steal it? I hid it. So they wouldn't touch you. So they would stop following you. I made them understand that leaving meant breaking up. They believed me. And you were out of danger. I rubbed my face with my hands. So, all of this, our whole fight, you leaving, it was for your sake, she said quietly. The room spun. I was expecting confessions of betrayal, of exhaustion, of new feelings. But what I heard was a confession that she had been saving my life for years, silently, painfully, destroying her own in the process. But that was only the first blow. Then came the second. Do you want to know the truth? She asked. I nodded. Then listen. She looked out the window again, as if searching for words there. That man, he didn't just come. He warned us. Your uncle, he didn't die by accident. It wasn't an accident, like you think. He was killed. I jumped up. Lilia, stop. You can't just say things like that. I'm not just saying it. She looked at me in a way that made it clear she wasn't lying. It was a warning to the others, to those who knew him, to those who could connect the dots. He was an important middleman. He knew too much. And one day, he crossed paths with the wrong people. I sat back down as if my legs had given way. My uncle was killed. Everything I knew about his death, a warehouse fire, an accident, an open case, a closed case, was a lie. That evening when we argued, Lila continued, I realized that if I stayed, they would start pressuring me to get to you through me. I couldn't let that happen. I chose to leave. I ruined everything so that you wouldn't even try to get me back, so that you would be angry. Her voice broke. So that you would be disappointed and look away, so that we would part ways. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to. My world was collapsing, as if walls that had stood for years had suddenly begun to crumble. Why did you keep quiet for so many years? I asked. She turned her head and looked at me in a way she had never looked at me before. Because I thought I was at least some use. As long as I hold the letter, as long as She swallowed. As long as I live, I distract them. And you're out of the game. Where is this sheet? She looked away. Not with me. I hid it, so no one can find it. Lilia, I moved closer. Did they find you? A long pause, and a quiet, barely audible answer. Yes. Silence fell over the room again. Not the awkward or irritating kind of silence, but a heavy silence, like the earth covering a coffin. How much time do I have? I asked after a long pause. She didn't understand right away. You should have told me earlier, I said. Because now, I won't leave. I won't let them touch you. She smiled, for the first time in the entire conversation. But it was the smile of someone who had already accepted their fate. Don't do anything stupid. It's not foolish. You don't know who you're dealing with. I only know one thing. You've been living with this burden for 5 years. Alone. For me. For someone, I sighed, who didn't even understand what you sacrificed. She closed her eyes. Her face grew gaunt, even paler. I didn't call you for help, she whispered. I called you so that you would just know the truth. So that you wouldn't live under the illusion that I left because of you. So that you wouldn't blame yourself. So that she fell silent. So that we could put an end to this. I understood. She was leaving. Not for a week, forever. Lilia, I said, feeling panic rising inside me. You're not. I don't want them to find me here, she said in a clear, sharp voice. I don't want them to see me with you. I have time to leave. To disappear. For real. To take the letter. To take it far away, where we'll lose its meaning. Can't they be stopped? Anyway, she shook her head. They're a network. They don't live in one place. They can't be caught. They don't have names. And they don't forgive. I stood up, paced the room, clenching my fists. This can't go on. You can, and it will. If you interfere, you will die. If you don't, you will remain on the sidelines. Move on with your life. That's exactly what I wanted. And you? She looked away. I'm used to it. She said it so calmly that it took my breath away. I did something I regretted a few seconds later, but I couldn't help myself. I walked over, took her cold hands, and said, I won't leave you. She flinched, as if my touch was something forbidden. Don't, she whispered. Please. No, not now. Outside, someone's footsteps crunched on the gravel. We both flinched. She stood up abruptly. Go away. What? Leave now. Through the back door. Quickly. Lilia, they're here. Footsteps could be heard outside again. Quiet. Steady. Lilia ran to the window, peered out cautiously, and turned pale. There are two of them. They're coming to the door. I felt a cold fear grip my chest. Tell me where the letter is. I'll get it. I can. She turned sharply toward me, and something like rage flashed in her eyes. I won't let you die. Lilia, go away. A loud bang on the door. We both flinched. She went to the back door, took out the key, and placed it in my palm. Run, and don't you dare look back. What about you? I have my own plans. Something strange appeared in her eyes. Calm, deadly. Lilia, don't go. There was another knock at the door, louder this time. She pushed me toward the exit. You asked how much time I have, she said quietly. Now, very little. But you have time. Live. Don't you dare stop. And she smiled. Weakly, bitterly, as if saying goodbye. Lilia, it's time. I took a step back, then another one. And when the door began to creak under the blows, I ran away. That was the last time I saw her alive. But I didn't know that then. I ran out into the overgrown garden, looking back only once. The lights in the house didn't come on. The silence grew thicker and thicker. I ran until I disappeared into the darkness. When I returned an hour later, the house was gone. All that remained was a smoldering skeleton. Firefighters were extinguishing the last embers. Neighbors stood in the yard, discussing a gas explosion, short circuit, and poor old house. I looked at the charred walls and black soot stains, and my head was ringing with emptiness. Lily was no longer among the living. I wanted to rush forward, to ask, to check, to see, but I was stopped. Not physically inside. It was as if something in her had foreseen this. In her words, it's time. Very little. Don't look back. Now, took on a frightening meaning. But even then, I didn't know everything. Because a week later, I received another letter. The handwriting was hers. But the date of dispatch was 2 days before our meeting. And that was the twist that turned my understanding of all the events upside down. The letter was lying in my mailbox among advertising brochures and utility bills. I recognized it immediately. The same neat, slanted handwriting, almost school-like, the one she used to write notes on the refrigerator, buy milk, or don't forget to turn off the iron. Only now, this handwriting did not evoke warmth in my chest, but rather an icy lump. The postmark showed the date, 2 days before our meeting. As I opened the envelope, my fingers trembled. I was afraid to read it, afraid to realize that she had foreseen how it would all end, and that the real truth would turn out to be much darker than what she had said aloud. But the letter was already there. I unfolded the sheet. If you're reading this letter, it means that everything has gone the way I could not change. And now you probably want to understand why it happened this way. Why I left. Why I kept silent. Why I did not let you intervene. There are many answers, but one is the main one. You are connected to that story much more deeply than you think. Much deeper than just your uncle's apartment or a twist of fate. They weren't watching me. They were watching you. I was just a cover. I stopped, feeling a tight, metallic ringing growing in my chest. It seemed as if each word was striking tiny blows on my nerves. I continued reading. They didn't want the letter. They wanted you. But you weren't supposed to know that. They wouldn't have killed you right away. They needed you to voluntarily join the game. To search for the truth yourself. To become part of their world. Your uncle once refused to serve them, and that's why he died. And you were an opportunity for them to correct his decision. The letter I found is just a pretext, a decoy. They knew that if you found the document, you would want to understand what it was. And by doing so, you would open the door that your uncle had closed. And I did everything I could to prevent you from opening it. I reread those lines over and over. They wanted me, but why? I was an ordinary person. I didn't have the necessary skills. I was of no interest. Then what? I found the answer a few lines below. You have a rare gift, memory. Do you think it's just a good ability? No. You notice details that others miss. You see connections where everyone else walks by. You didn't realize it yourself, but your uncle saw in you what could make you the perfect guardian. He didn't want that. He wanted to give you a simple life. But organizations like that, they don't forget. They search, and they found you. When I came into your life, I didn't know that. But later I realized it. I noticed the oddities. and I realized that they were waiting for the moment when you would reach out to them yourself. I had to leave so that wouldn't happen. I put the letter down on the table. The world around me seemed unreal, as if I were standing on a stage and the scenery was beginning to crumble. I picked up the letter, left the apartment, and walked through the night city, not paying attention to where I was going. Everything was rushing around inside me. I couldn't understand. Was it true? Or had she been cornered so much that she saw a conspiracy where there was none? But no. Those footsteps in the courtyard. Those people. The real fire. An incredible coincidence? Hardly. I stopped in an old park. I sat down on a cold bench. And I opened the letter again. That evening when we met, I already knew they were coming. But I needed to tell you the truth that I couldn't tell you then, 5 years ago. I didn't leave because I was tired. I left because I loved you. And I knew that if I stayed, you would die. Yes, I said that word. You would die. I saw that you would start digging. That sooner or later you would find that little crack in the wall that your uncle left behind, and you would crawl into it. To find an explanation. To find a truth. To justify his death. To prove to yourself that you could see it through to the end. And that's what they're waiting for. So I became a shield. I became a barrier. I became the one they would perceive as the keeper of the secret. They were watching me, not you. I was my uncle's mistake. You were the heir. But now everything is different. When you receive this letter, I will be gone. It will be better that way. It will be safer. And one last thing. The letter. Yes, I found it. But it's a decoy. Uncle tricked them. He left them coordinates that lead nowhere. He wasn't that naive. He knew they would come for him. If they come for you, don't believe a word they say. Don't try to explain. Don't try to prove your innocence. Just move on with your life. Follow your own path. Don't look back. I've already done everything I can to make sure they don't touch you again. You'll think I sacrificed myself for you. But that's not true. I just finally did what I should have done many years ago. Goodbye. And don't remember me with anger. Ed, I sat there for a long time. Hours, probably. The paper trembled in my hands. The words cut into my memory from within. Everything I knew about those years turned out to be upside down. All my accusations, resentments, bitterness, insignificant compared to what she went through. She saved me. Twice. She saved me from enemies I didn't even see. She saved me from a truth that could have destroyed me. She saved me from my own craving for explanations that would have become a noose. And her death was the price for my life to remain normal. But was it death? Weeks passed, then months. Life tried to return to normal, but its contours had become unfamiliar. Sometimes I felt like someone was watching me. Not stalking me, just watching. Maybe it was just fear talking. Maybe it was paranoia. Or maybe they really were watching. To make sure I didn't dig any deeper. I really didn't dig. But one day, about a year after the events, when I had already changed jobs and moved out of my uncle's apartment, I received a small package. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed a road, deserted, narrow, leading to the horizon, and a female figure in the distance. I couldn't make out her face or any details, but I recognized her slumped shoulders. I recognized her gait. I recognized the gesture she always used to fix her hair. And on the back, there was only one word. Live. No signature. There was no need. I don't know if she left on her own, if she was taken away, if she disappeared in the literal sense, or found a way to become invisible to them. I don't know what happened to the organization, or if they are still watching me. I don't know if they left me alone, or just waiting to see how things turn out. But one thing I know for sure, her words before she left, the very first one she said many years ago when she stood in the doorway and looked at me with eyes I didn't understand at the time. You'll understand later. Now I understand. The meaning turned out to be different, much deeper, more painful, more honest. I realized that sometimes a person leaves not because they have fallen out of love, but because they love too much to let you die with them. And that sometimes the truth is not an open door, but a wall that is better not to look behind. I realized that she wasn't a mistake or a weakness. She was the last person who fought to the end. And if she said, live, then I have no right to do otherwise.